Hey folks, how you doing? Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Frottage Collagraph plates. So this is part two of a demo. So if you haven't seen the first demo, please check out the previous video. I'm going to have the link in the description below. All right. So where we left off, I had made these three collagraph plates out of various materials. And one thing I wanted to add to that conversation is that you don't need all of these materials to make a collagraph plate. You can simply just get away with just glue and cardboard if that's all you've got. And speaking of getting away with that, one thing I did want to mention is that I did modify our key plate a little bit. I wanted some more texture up here, so I just glued a couple more pieces of cardboard, as you can see. Alright folks, let's talk about some materials we can use here for frottage. So I'm going to show you a lot of different materials, and you obviously don't need all of them, but just having one or two to choose from is going to be great. So we're going to go over a couple things here. Let's just start with some really basic pencils. I've got some really soft graphite pencils here. I've got a 6B and an 8B. I've also got woodless graphite too. Now for frottage, I really actually prefer the woodless ones because they have so much more graphite to use in them. Also, I have some colored pencils here. I've got some Prismacolor pencils. I got some free samples from Dick Blick. I also have some Stabilo pencils, which are water soluble. I really love these, so you can see how short and loved that they are. Some other materials too. I have some litho crayons, so for lithography, some traditional crayons. I have a tablet, a rubbing crayon, a really large drawing stick here. You can also get litho crayons more traditionally in these pencils, as well as they come in these little tubes, which give you long sticks. And these are great. These are just like a black wax. There's different hardnesses. The lower the number, the softer it is. The higher the number, the harder the wax is. And I've also got some charcoal. So I have a really nice little lovely charcoal set here. That again comes in pencil form, but also what's really nice about this one is it also has this lovely large stick here too. So one thing with using something in a pencil form, it's really nice to have a long, exaggerated tip. You can see how much I have exposed there. That's also why the woodless pencils are so great, because we can use this entire edge to frottage with. Again, because we're trying to just get the surface of the image to transfer. We don't want anything too small or too precise. Again, I'm not going to be trying to frottage with this straight up and down. I'm going to be using the edge, right? So not like this, like this. So I'm rubbing that edge across there. If you don't have a pencil sharpener, and a lot of these kits where it's really nice that they come with a pencil sharpener, you can also use a little bit of sandpaper too to help file them down so you have a nice flat surface to use. Otherwise, if you're really careful, you can use some scissors. So let's see if I can lengthen this one a little bit. And let's see if we can figure this out here. So I'm going to keep my fingers obviously behind the blade, and I'm just going to shave off that wood a little bit, exposing more of the tip. Alright, some other materials that we can use. Traditionally we have some chalk pastels. We have some oil pastels too. Conte crayon works really great. Again, it comes in all colors, but I have some really lovely earth tones here. But also just regular Crayola wax crayons. Any wax crayons you can get a hold of is going to work really nicely for this. Now, when I'm using some of these materials, again, if they come in a stick form like that, that's perfect. But if they have sort of some paper wrapped around them like this, I do like to just sort of tear that off. So again, I have a nice, long, flat edge to use when I'm frotaging. So you might want to consider doing that. We're also going to try some non-traditional drawing materials. So I have some turmeric here from my pantry. I've got a blush palette for makeup that I'm going to try out. Some lovely colors. See, I can hit pan on that one. I've also got a couple loose pigments as well. It doesn't have to be makeup. You know, they do make artist grade loose pigments, but this is what I've got lying around. So we're going to try these out too and see how they work. Again, if you need to sort of expand what you have from the limitations of your home right now, these might be some options for you. Some other things you may want when frottaging. Some pencil sharpeners are always nice. Again, being an art student, you tend to collect a lot of different kinds here. Any pencil sharpener will work for you. Again, you can use the sandpaper or even scissors if you're really careful not to cut yourself sharpening things up. It's also really nice to have some different kinds of erasers. So I have a white vinyl eraser here. These are really good for cleaning up your edges or mistakes that you make when frottaging when, say, you're using something like graphite or charcoal, or any kind of like loose pigment. You can clean up with these. And then I also really like kneaded erasers too. Again, these are still in their packaging, but you'll see me use these kneaded erasers that are flexible. These are really good for actually cleaning up waxy things. So like the Crayola crayon, if you get a little bit in your edge, you can pull it up much more easily than with a white vinyl eraser using a kneaded eraser. So it's nice to kind of have these around. Again, being in the arts, you tend to collect quite a bit of things. All right, folks, let's talk about proofing. So after we've made our plates, we want to see what they look like before committing to our good paper and also trying to stack them on top of each other. And this is good in case we want to make any changes or additions like what I did here to my plate. So we always want to proof. And obviously when we have so many materials that we can use, we just really want to figure out which material works best for which plate. We also want to think about which way we want to stack them as well. Trying to put, say, a crayon on top of a pastel doesn't work out so well because that pastel is so much looser. When I try to rub that wax crayon on top, it just ends up smearing that chalk pastel underneath. So you also want to think about layering and how the materials and in what order you put these plates together. All right. So I have just some scrap newsprint here. Again, for frottage, you want to be using a thin, hard paper. You don't want anything too thick, like watercolor paper, construction paper, printmaking paper. Those are all too thick. So we want something fairly thin. So even like Eastern washi papers, computer paper actually works really great. And most computer papers, believe it or not, are archival. And that's what I'm going to be using today when we work on our good prints. Or good frottaging prints here. But I'm just going to take some proofs on some newsprint that I've cut up here. All right, so this is just, again, I'm just testing to see how this goes. So again, I'm going to have my plate face up. I'm going to lay my thin newsprint on top. And we're going to try out this tablet crayon, this wax tablet crayon for lithography. So I'm going to use my one hand, and it should be clean. You know, we don't want to have any smudges on the paper here. I'm going to use my hand to help hold down the plate and the paper together. And I'm just going to start rubbing on the surface. The harder your drawing material is, the less it's going to sink into the texture. The softer your drawing material is, the more it's going to pick up sort of that negative space. So you kind of want to find a balance. Again, that's going to be based off of the materials you use. It's going to be based off of how you made your plate to begin with. And I'm going in a couple different directions, and as you can see, I didn't hold it down too much, so I'm getting some shifting here. So again, it's really good to practice. You want to proof and get comfortable with this technique before moving on to, again, your good paper. But you can see how we have, again, a really nice translation of all those high areas and these really textural areas I put in there. And then we can see, of course, the additions there in the background too. So try this with several different materials, see what works best. All right, let's change out, let's try something else. let's try a colored pencil. So again, I'm not going to be using this like I'm drawing normally or writing. I'm going to be using this on its side. So again, I'm going to find this flat edge. I'm just kind of running it across the surface there. Oh, look at that. And you can kind of find these edges, right? So we really want the shape of this brick to come out. When you find them, when just doing sort of a light pass to begin with, you can go back in and really help emphasize them. Ooh, slipped a little bit there. Again, I'm using my non-dominant hand to really help hold down what's going on. Again, the harder you press, the more drawing material you'll deposit. And it sometimes helps to go in different directions, too. Alright. As you can see, two, similar, I mean, it all looks the same from the same plate, but two really distinctive ways that they frottage differently. Alright, let's try this just Crayola crayon. Again, I'm going to use it on its side so it's sitting flat against. And the flatter your drawing material is, again, it's really only going to touch the very top edges of your plate. If you need to get a lot of details, you can use that edge, but as you can see here on a scrap piece of paper, I've just sort of rubbed that down so then I have a flatter edge there too, so then I can have maybe a little bit more control to go in and frottage these highest areas, giving them a little bit more pigment, a little more pressure, but still generally using a very flat surface. So again, my technique is I try to go over typically the majority of the plate, or at least the region of the plate that I want to print very light first to sort of establish the base information. If I want to go in and bring some more areas out, like in these little pieces of cardboard at the top of my plate, I can go back in with that edge and really emphasize them. Or if I really want to come back in to the line work that I made with this hot glue in the plate, I can go back in and really bring those out too. You can see how different and similar they are. Again, it's just going to take some experimentation. Alright, one thing I'm excited to try is using some of these blushes to see how well this would work. So let's get another piece of newsprint here. I'm going to lay that on top. And now I'm going to use I just have a shop towel here, but you can use any sort of towel or paper. And I'm just going to wrap this around my finger. And I'm going to use this as my surface for frotaging. So I definitely think, depending on what kind of makeup or pigment powder you're using, they might be sheer or translucent. So I'm going to go for this darker one. Again, I'm just going to pick a little bit up on my finger. And because this is loose pigment, you do want to start with just a very gentle brushing across the surface. Hey, look at that. It does work. Ooh, I think I just shifted it there. Let's try getting a little bit more. Yeah, I definitely shifted it. Oh well. But you can see the sheer quality of makeup gives us some really nice subtle tones. Ooh. So we might need to go over it a couple times to build up the surface a little bit. Let's try out some turmeric powder and see how that works. Alright, so be careful with turmeric. It does stain quite a bit. I'm going to start by just rubbing in this into the towel a bit. I'm going to shake some off here. There. So we got some rubbed in. Let's see. Very subtle, very light. It might be hard to see on this gray newsprint, but it is taking on the form. So this is actually working pretty well. All right. So I'm just going to work right on top of this because, again, the pigments are so light on here. Let's just see what some chalk pastel looks like. Oh yeah, wants to deposit a lot of material. So if you have big open areas, this will probably be really nice to use to fill them in. Looks good. Now what I was mentioning before with trying to use chalk and then say go over top of it with a oil pastel is you're going to get some smudging. So here if I have this orange oil pastel, because the chalk pastel is just some loose pigment, you can see how it's kind of pushing and smearing around. It's hard for me to get a good layer that looks nice and clean on top with the orange. So again, when you're using multiple different kinds of materials, I would start with, say, the waxier materials, the wetter ones, and then sort of build up to the dry things like chalk or graphite on top of them. Anyhow, the takeaway from this is just try things out. Get a feel for each plate. Each plate's going to be a bit different than the other one. Try out the different colors you want to have. Again, even use your newsprint to try to figure out what combinations do you want to work out. Because you don't want anything too close together, right? Because this red and this orange, as we can see on the paper, are very close in value range. So try to get a nice spread across. Again, spread being having some lights, some midtones, and some dark values too. So there is, a little bit of strategy involved, again, from what materials you're using in what order, as well as what values and colors of materials you're using too. So you definitely want to have a plan of action, and that's where proofing is really important to try out. Alright folks, so once you've done your proofing, you figured out your color scheme, you figured out what materials you want to use, and you're ready to go on to doing some color tests, seeing what all three plates look like together. We want to be able to, change our plates out underneath our paper and keep everything in the same order and, lined up to each other. So that's called registration. So we're going to make a registration guide, and there's a couple ways to do so. And we've done registration before in the past. Again, I'm working on a cutting mat here, so obviously this has a grid laid out, so we can be using this if you want. I should mention I'm working on a fairly small 11 by 17 cutting mat just to show you folks at home that you don't need a big space for doing any of this. You just need a little bit of space dedicated for doing some art making. So you can use your cutting mat, again, as a guide. You know, we have our grid here. But I prefer to make it's a little bit easier to look at this paper registration guide here. The way I make my registration guides is I start off with just what is my plate size. So step one, what's my plate size? And we know from our last video I'm doing a 6" by 6". So that's also 15.3 centimeters by 15.3 centimeters. So I drew that out using my straight edge. You can also trace your block. And if I take my block, you'll see that it fits in there just right. Now this is a good point to take your other 3 blocks or plates, put them on here and make sure that they all fit and that they're all that 6" by 6" square. I also labeled the top and bottom just to give myself an idea here. Now if you don't have a big piece of newsprint as well, you can just take multiple pieces of paper and tape them together on the back and do this on top. But I do like to have a piece of paper that is bigger than my printing paper, which I'm going to be using plain 8.5 by 11 letter white computer paper here. It's thin, it's white, it's bright. I think even the one I have is archival too, so it's acid free. So it should work nicely for our purposes today. But back to the registration guide again. Step 1 is draw out your plate size. And then step 2 is to figure out how your printing paper or frottage paper is going to sit on top of here with nice even borders. So again, here's the top and the bottom. I let the extra paper fall to the bottom here, so we have a nice weighted bottom. But I did keep the left, top, and right borders all symmetrical. So with a 6" by 6" plate on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, I have 1.25" on these 3 sides, and then again I just let the extra go down there. But when you're drawing out your paper here, again you want to start by drawing this first, and then based off of your plate size, then measure off of these straight lines where those borders will be, and then draw them in secondly. Alright, so as you noticed when I was trying to demo, it's hard to hold the paper in place. It's hard to keep the plate in place too. So I'm going to modify this a little bit to help hold things down. But, alright, so I've got some cardboard left over from our last demo. I love Reese's Puffs, not a sponsor, but they can be if they want to. And this is great because we know that the same size as my plate, the same thickness as my plate is made out of this. So I'm going to cut a couple squares of this. A couple more, maybe more like a half dozen. And then we're going to use some blue tape here. And I'm going to use these as little like stop blocks to keep my my block in place. So I'm going to take the edge of this cardboard just to where my block should lock into place, and I'm going to tape that down. And I'm going to do this on a couple different edges. Well, the one thing I'm going to do is not make sure that this goes over where my paper needs to line up. Alright, so again, I've got that corner locked out. And I'm just going to repeat that for the other sides here. Alright, so I've got these little pieces of cardboard taped in there, so when I go to put my plates, in there, it should fit right in. Yep. And then hold them in place so I don't have a lot of movement. Right, that's nice and snug. Again, my plates are really accurate. the drawing is really accurate, so that's going to hold them from shifting around so I don't get too much movement. So when I'm going to frottage these, I'm actually going to hinge my paper down because I want my paper to stay in the same place and I want my plates to stay in the same place as well. Alright, so here's my computer paper. And because I have so much extra space down here, I'm gonna use this section as my hinge. But one thing I'll do first is, because this is just paper, I'm gonna take some tape. I just have some masking tape here. I'm gonna tape down on this long edge. Doesn't need to be exactly where the paper is going to start. And that's so when I use my blue tape and tape to my computer paper, it's not going to tear up the newsprint, so I can use this for multiple times. Lastly, what I'm going to do as well, before I forget, I should say, is I'm also just going to tape down the corners of my registration guide to my cutting mat here, so that this doesn't shift around on me. Alright, so when I hinge my paper, I'm going to use my 8.5 by 11 drawn section there, rectangle. It's going to lay on there, really nice. I'm just going to use 2 small pieces of blue tape. I'm just going to tape them to this bottom edge that I'm going to hinge across. Now, blue tape, even though it is removable, it still can tear paper, so I'm going to kind of get rid of some of that initial tack. Again, you can put it against your shirt and remove it, just so it's not quite as sticky. Sticky enough to hold it in place while we frottage, but not so sticky that it's going to tear our paper. Yeah, don't need to go all the way across the bottom, just a couple little points there. So now I have that hinged in place. I can insert my block. Again, make sure that plate goes all the way around, goes all the way into your little stop blocks there. I can lay that across. I can frottage. I can lift this up, change out the plate, use my next material, and keep on going. So again, this should keep everything in register, should keep everything in the same place. It's a nice little system. Again, it just takes a little time to set up, but it helps make the results easier, better, and cleaner. Alright folks, so let's try and make a frottage using our 3 plates and our registration guide. So I'm going to start off with this tinfoil one that is going to be, the majority of our background information. Again, I'll make sure that the top goes to this side and the bottom of this side for all 3. Alright. Again, remember your non-dominant hand that's holding things down, make sure that stays nice and clean, so we don't get any smudging on here. And I'm going to use the edge to just start off nice and light. And again, I really want that very irregular sort of shape. And you can get different values the harder you press or the softer you press. You can pick up more information or less information. So I'm actually pressing a little bit harder. Again, I'm using that flattened edge here that I have, so it's a little bit smaller of some information. Alright, that looks pretty good. Alright, so now I'm going to, again, keep that attached, hinge that out. I'm going to change out for my second block. Again, change directions. Get a little bit more in here. Again, I want this whole brick to fill in a little bit more than what it is. Looks pretty nice. Now that kneaded eraser is going to be great for getting this wax crayon off in these negative spaces here if I go ahead and clean that up. Alright, our final plate. And make sure that fits in there pretty well. And for this, I'm going to use an 8B, I believe. Yeah, an 8B graphite pencil. All right, look at that. Again, be very gentle when peeling off the hinge tape so as not to tear my paper. Pretty nice. Again, we can see how all three layers of information work together. I'm pretty happy with it. Looks like I had a tiny little misregistration here, so I might go back and just make sure that these little stop blocks are taped down really well. I'm going to take a white vinyl eraser and clean up sort of those pencil marks around the edges. I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and clean up some of the wax on the outside here so I have a really good presentation, right? Presentation is everything. But this looks really cool. Alright folks, so you can see here I have some of my tests that I worked on. This one was the crayon with some pencil on top. This one is actually just all crayon. This was the test I did in between the videos, so you can see I didn't add that texture in up there. This one I think turned out my favorite was all the colored pencil. I really felt like I had a lot of control with this. Again, these are just proofs. I haven't gone through and cleaned up the edges yet for presentation. I tried the chalk pastel out. Very, very messy, though I quite like the look of this. I think if I'm going to use something so soft as chalk pastel, I need to have very dramatic high and low areas, much more so than what I built up in this quick little demo. I definitely need some more practice with this to get better control, because it's just a little too sloppy for my own personal taste. But as you can see here, once you kind of figure out what you like, what sort of colors, what combinations are working best together, you can go ahead and then addition this. Again, these are just me messing around. This is a very quick demo, very quick sort of just printing here, just to get the idea across. Again, for my own personal work, if I was doing this, I would take a little bit more time building my plates. I would take a little bit more time in practicing with the frottage and the different materials to see what sort of colors and stacking that I really like. But overall, this is, again, a really fun and I think cool way to make work with mostly recycled materials and things you have around the house already. So, I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for sticking through this video. And if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you folks next time.